time in that Bryan, New Hampshire zone? Is that why you use it as a focus? Something as a young person, or?
Most of my life. I used to own a restaurant right on Rye Harbor, and I was there for 38 years. And long story short, I lost the family feud over the ownership of the property. So my tenure as a restaurateur came to an end. And when the writing was on the wall and I knew that was coming to an end, that's when I started writing. And it was by accident.
Are some of your stories related to events, or did you get thoughts from your restaurant business, or just
none of them are based on actual events. I think all characters are composites of everybody that touches you at some point in their life. So I have friends who swear they know exactly who this character is, and all I can say is, that's in your mind. It's all fiction. I made it up. As far as the nookie, and people tease my wife about it. And my answer is, no, that's what I think it ought to be like. There are scenes that take place in the fictitious restaurant called Ben. And, yeah, of course, that's based on experience. So it's believable. You see what's going on. My protagonist is a runner, and he's a sailor. And those two activities play an important role in each book. And I think they are well portrayed. People that sail really like the way it's portrayed. They said, you got it right. And the same thing with the running. Runners understand it. I'm hoping that someone that's not a runner or not a sailor can read it and feel it. Seems to be one.
Do you have a goal of range of numbers of pages, like 200, 300, 150?
I just see where they go. Yeah. I don't know.
I think often you end up writing several hundred pages more, or twice as much, and then you back away from it. And if you're lucky, you have friends, or you have an editor, or you have somebody who says, this really some of this needs to be carved away. I'll give you one specific example. When I was writing about Becky and her first marriage, which is not to our hero, I thought, well, I need to get them married. So I wrote about 30 pages about how they eloped in West Virginia. And I did a lot of research on eloping in West Virginia. I didn't need to do it myself, but I could, to understand the story. Honestly, I'm joking about that, but I did do some research. I found out where you could elope to and how it would work, and I have all the scenes laid out. And my editor said, that's just like, we don't need that, but can you sum all that up in a paragraph? Which I did. So, and characters, I made up almost everybody, but I also have some real people, and I went to them and said, may I use you in this book? And they both said yes. And one woman I made up was somebody I saw when I was 15 for probably 10 minutes, who sashayed into a gathering of nervous adolescents, of which I was one. And this woman just had it, and she kind of walked in, and I'm like, oh my heavens, what is going on? And I happened to see her later for about 2 seconds, and she said, when you want to make an entrance, she learned it in charm school. So I took that, which really was a total of 10 minutes, 12 minutes when I was 16, and she became a major character in this book, because I thought she was great, and she kind of evolved in front of me.
Yeah, you grab pieces, you see something in somebody that you see on the street or in an airport, or just some little thing, and that becomes part of the character, or maybe becomes the basis for the character, and you let your mind work with that. But the endings, the books several times I've been at a point and I'm saying, okay, the end is in sight, I'm going to be done with this thing in a week. And 6 weeks later, I'm finally finishing because the damn characters keep taking these right-hand turns and zigzagging all over the place before it can actually end. And that's just what they do. And that's the way life is. It's messy. It's never a straight line.
Can I ask you? So when you write this way, you have to do a real lot of revision.
I'm always writing to revise. Yeah, I mean, usually when I start the day, I look over what I did the day before.
You revise as you go.
So I kind of revise as I go, but then once it's all finished, then it gets I do a major revision. And then it goes to the copy editor who reinforces the fact that I'm a complete illiterate fool. We rework it again.
I feel like, you know the daisy wheel printer? Remember those?
Yeah.
Where it goes. I kind of feel like when I'm writing a story, I'm going, just that first time, that pass over, and I'm getting a sense of it.
Yep.
And then I do another pass, and it gets a little deeper, and I keep going. And sometimes I take some of that out, but it has to just kind of evolve for me. And it does, any story comes from your own experience. It has to, because you have to know what you're writing about, or you have to be a really good observer. I have to do a lot of research. For instance, in this book, Becky loses her sister. Thank God I've never lost either of my sisters. So I interviewed a lot of people about what it was like to lose a sibling. How do you feel? What happens? How do you evolve over your own life? So that's
And for me, where I don't have any plot figured out from the start, I don't know where the story's going to go.
But it's a murder mystery.
Yeah, there's...
Like a general...
Sometimes it just starts with a dead body.
Yeah.
And then you have to create a story around that. Other times, the body ends up incidental to something else you're looking at, the relationship between Jack and Max. That sometimes turns into other things, or brings into those other events that touch their relationship. So it's, I never know exactly where it's going. So sometimes I'll be chugging along and the story's going along, and then I realize that, well, for this to actually be happening now, or for this to work, I've really got to go way, way back and fix some things and make some changes. So there's a lot of to and fro as you try to get it right so that it does work. And there are times you're chugging along and all of a sudden you hit that point and you're like, this is just stupid, it ain't working at all. And then it goes,
30 pages in
yeah,
a paragraph.
just go,
right.
Just get into it.
Yeah.
And the story all of a sudden takes a different direction because the way I was going is not working. So you step back to some point and then go off in another direction and it does work. It's very strange. The way that I've tried to describe it, I'm very visual. And a lot of times it's as if I'm watching a movie. But it's a blank white screen, and when I think something, I see it on the screen, and then what I see on the screen is what I then write on the page. And it all happens simultaneously. And I've run into a lot of writers that understand this. People that are not writers look at you like you have 3 eyeballs and you're completely certified.
I know. I always thought everybody had stories in their head. And everybody
Voices in their head.
No, I mean, imagine, my... I had a guy who was... I met a guy who told me, I was writing some sort of a difficult story. I was writing my first book was a memoir about life with a man who was eating disordered, and men are not supposed to be eating disordered in our society, but 40% of people in college who are bulimic are male. So I was writing that story, and this guy told me that I should pretend that I was going down into a dark, slimy, awful place, write what I was going to write, and then crawl back up onto the surface to something in my mind that was a bright, cheerful place. And I thought, well, that's really weird. But I tried it. I would literally lie on the rug in my office and go, walk down into the slimy mess of the cistern, and then envision everything. I'd see it, I'd smell it, I'd touch it, I'd hear it. And I'd just kind of get up in a trance and go and write. And I was seeing and smelling. It's easy because I was writing what I was seeing and hearing. So I think having a visual, that's why I hate horror stories, because if I can still see the bad stuff in Rosemary's Baby. I mean, and it this stuff haunts me. It's like, because I do think visually.
Do you find that, just for any of you, do you find that you should write in a notebook different thoughts that you have and then go to a computer and sort of feed from this, or should you go on a computer and go in and delete?
I'm not that early on.
I think it depends. I feel like I'm constantly under attack by ideas. I have Post-it notes, I have stuff on my desk at work, I have stuff on my desk at home, I have things everywhere. And then when I come home for the night, or maybe at the end of the week or whatever, I'll take all of those notes, combine them into a giant note file. It kind of becomes my repository of ideas. So I have the general outline of where things are going with the story, but as I'm going, I'll write down where these things should possibly go. So I'll get to this point in the story, okay, where was that idea about that one scene that I had? I'll pull that over, bring it in, and work with it. So it just depends. And an idea can be anytime, anywhere. You just have to hopefully have a pen and paper handy to write it down, and then I just transcribe it into my computer at a later time.
Yeah, I've done that. Really, I'm trying, right now I'm all about trying to make my writing process more efficient, and I've been on this kick for like the last year. So at first I have pad and paper, and I write things, but it was like, so now I just take my computer, my iPad with me everywhere, and I put everything on there directly. And I have separate files for that, outline information. I have sort of it depends what I'm writing. The story I'm writing now is about my British family during World War II. So I've been doing research on that for 4 years. And I have, I'm taking notes on, it's over 100 books now. I've got files like that on everybody, and, war diaries from Dunkirk, and, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just like, I'm so far down into World War II, I don't know how I got here today. But but I also save things, like stories. I remember seeing a story of an old man in Florida who made friends with rats. And when the social workers found him, they found that the rats were his only friends. And so, of course, they sent him to a nursing home and they killed all the rats. And to me, it seemed just a terribly sad story. Well, I don't know where he's going to come into a book, but someday he's going to be there. So I save little scraps of paper and try and put them in plastic sleeves so I don't lose them.
When you said a lot of your ideas come in dreams, was it which one? It was you, right?
No, it wasn't me.
It was you. Okay. Do you have a pad of paper next to your bed so that when you wake up you can write it right down?
If it's not right next to my bed, I find one immediately.
Because I've had the same thing. I have a notepad next to my bed, and as soon as I wake up, I turn the light on, write it down. My wife yells at me, but I have to do it.
I think there's a magic time.
Go ahead.
I think there's a magic time when we're just waking up. And that's when all my best ideas come to me, and I just let it sort of sift back and forth like seaweed in the water, in the ocean. It just kind of floats back and forth, and I kind of see what happens. And the trick is to try and remember it before or not forget it before I get downstairs, because sometimes whole poems come out, sometimes, something going to happen in a book. Sometimes it's nothing. It's like, what's the laundry list or what am I going to do today? But if you respect that time and treasure it, I think it can be very productive.
I'm an author, and my problem has been that I start to write the main trunk, and then all of a sudden I'm running off on a tangent on this branch, and then off on another branch, and I'm having a hard time getting back to the main trunk. Is there any things you use that?
An editor.
Yeah.
And they're brutal. But I think those branches are useful, because like the story about the wedding that, we're running on, that I know what happened to those characters now. Nobody else does, but I do, and that gives me some confidence in them. So I would, let them branch out and leaf out, and then when you fall off the end of it.
So you feel that's acceptable to have many tangents?
It may not be acceptable to the reader or the final story, but it may help you find the story.
Part of your process to really kind of familiarize yourself with your story and your character. It takes me a while to really know my characters. It's like I build momentum as I'm writing it, and then I become more familiar, and then it's easier to write, and then it just kind of goes on its own.
See, you're saying the same thing that we've been saying. You as you're writing, they do layer themselves and do build themselves. You do get to know them better. I know some people say, okay, this is your character sheet, and it's like 6 pages long, and all these headings. It's like, I can't do that. I have to live with them and get to know them. I can't predict them.
I used to write very sequentially. Chapter 1, paragraph 1, next paragraph 2. I had to very undefined for me. It was very hard to kind of deviate. I didn't want to. I wanted to tell that story in the order in which it was coming. But then, as inspiration strikes, you want to go off on that tangent. And I learned, don't fight it. If this is where my head is right now, if this is where the ideas are coming, go with it. You can always come back to this part later. You never know where that nugget's going to go, if it's going to go anywhere. But the point is, this is where your mind is, and this is where your muse is telling you to go. Go with it. That's mine.
And also, you might find it's another story.
Right.
So you write it. You write the whole thing about, I wrote a story that got too long about a kid and a tree. And someday she may get into another story, or maybe I'll go back to it. But it didn't work for the story I was working on at the time. But don't throw it out.
It's no good.
Maybe you have a
Yeah.
theory.
Yeah.
Well, I'm writing memoirs. It's on World War II submarines and ram cutting it and some shots the whole bit. And I started writing all these tangents, but now I have 47 other stories, and I'm just publishing my one book. And should I do a